Welcome back to Bull Sessions here on 680 KFEQ. Here's your hosts, Randy Baker and agronomist Brad Law.
Okay, we're back quickly. Bradley, we made it back. We want to talk to Jim, so I'm
Jim
not going
has
to
a
talk
lot of good stuff
He
to say.
does. He was just talking about, we asked him when's the best time to soil test. So, Jim, go ahead with that.
You bet. What I tell people is it's not so important when it's that they are consistent every year when they do that. And if you decide you're going to pull samples right after harvest, that is perfectly fine, but it's key that you do that the next year as well. And the reason for that is because you can get changes in the soil over the winter time, and that has to do with rainfall events after harvest, and what takes place is those nutrients that are left in the stalks, corn stalks, for instance, are going to begin to break down. Right.
Did you say we need to do it every year?
And they're going to make their way back in the soil. So you're going to have a different reading 1st of November versus the 1st of March. And it's not a substantial difference, but there's a difference. And as long as you understand that, you can answer those questions when they come up. But as far as your question, every year, it depends. What I would say is if you have a new piece of ground, I would recommend, if not every year, at least every other year. As you become familiar with that piece of ground, we may be talking about every third year. That is really dependent on you, the grower. And whenever the more data you have, the easier it is to see trend lines, the easier it is to calibrate your recommendations. Right. And possibly increase your bottom line. So,
my question on that was because the reason I ask is because a few years ago I had bought a farm. It was like 5 years ago, and we soil sampled it that year, and they said you need to do this again in 4 years. Of course, I've had Brad. He read the soil tests that came from Midwest Labs, of course, and he's kept me up to snuff on it, but I've been curious if I need to soil test that a little bit more. So that's why I was asking that. Like you said,
right.
a couple of years anyway.
And again, new piece of ground, definitely more often than something you're very familiar with and that you have some history on.
Right. How long does it take to get results back when we send the tests in?
Well, our typical turnaround time is 2 to 3 days. Right. So if we receive a sample on Wednesday, you're going to have results on Friday. Now, I will say in the fall, which is our busiest time of year, from about mid-October to whenever the snow flies in December. Right. That's our busiest time. So we typically do run into an additional day of turnaround. But the majority of the year, you're looking at those 2 to 3 days. That's quick. Of course, you've got shipping from where you're at, and that may be 1 to 2 days shipping. So a lot of our clients, we're talking a 5 business day turnaround from the time they ship.
Well, what I've done with you guys is if I pull samples on Monday morning and next day pay the extra for the higher dollar postage, next day air them to you, you get them on Tuesday, Thursday afternoon, I usually have an email with the results, and I can get that right on my smartphone and start looking at them, and then I can stew over the weekend on, okay, do I want to do something now and start on it Monday, or, just take time to evaluate it, and then I'll get a paper copy in the mail later. But when we get that soil test, I get a lot of guys that will email me their soil test and say, well, what do you think? I did the test. Now, what do I do? They said, well, the lab says this, but can you explain something to me? What would you do if it was your farm? And if we just kind of start at the, on the top kind of left of the soil test, what's organic matter? That's one question that says, well, what is that? What does it do?
Yeah, and it's a question I get from time to time, but unfortunately it's something that people aren't looking at enough. And what we're talking about, what organic matter is, it's a measurement of the amount of plant and animal residue in the soil. Mm-hmm. And color is a good indicator of organic matter. In other words, the darker the soil, the higher the organic matter content. And when you have a higher organic matter, you have better water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity. And what I like to kind of think of it as is a sponge, and it's going to hold that water, and it's going to hold nutrients that can move or leach out of the soil, like nitrate, nitrogen.
Right.
And as far as nutrient release, organic matter serves as a reserve for many of those essential nutrients, like nitrogen, phosphorus.
I had some notes on that, Jim. Like on that water holding of it, a 2% soil organic matter can hold about 32,000 gallons of water per acre, which is 21% of a 5.5-inch rain.
That's correct.
A 5% soil organic matter holds 80,000 gallons of water, which would be 53% of a 5.5-inch rain. So, if you had a 2-inch rain, you'd be able to benefit more from that. And then I dug on my notes on the nutrient releasing, depending upon the year, because you've got live critters in the soil that are going to affect this. The organic matter would release 10 to 20 pounds of N per percent of organic matter and 1 to 2 pounds of phosphorus per percent. So if you had a 3% and it released 2 pounds of P, that'd be 3 times 2 would be 6 pounds. Or on the nitrogen, if it was 3% at 10, that's 30 pounds. Or if you had a pasture at 5% and it was releasing the full 20 pounds, that'd be getting like 100 pounds of nitrogen on your pasture without you having to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. You did your homework.
Well, those are some things when you come across those. They've got this note feature on the iPhone. You save that to your notes so then you can reference it, because I can't remember those numbers, but I know I've got them to pull them up again.
Yeah.
The next thing when we move across the soil test, you guys do what's called a P1 bray and a P2 bray.
That's correct.
What's that?
What's the difference? And, when I'm thinking of P2 and P1, I've got, D1 and D2 on my tractor when I'm shifting gears. So do you guys got gear shifts up there?
His neck is red, Jim.
We do not. What P1 and P2 is referring to is it's an extraction method. So we're extracting the phosphorus from the soil, and when you see that P1 or Bray 1 number, that is available phosphorus. And we want that P1 number to be in the range of 25 to 30 parts per million. Okay. And we would like the P2 to be in the range of 50 to 60 parts per million. Now, what P2 is available phosphorus plus a part of reserve phosphorus. So that goes back to that organic matter we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But so, in other words, if we have 25 parts per million P1 and we have 50 P2, 25 of that 50 P2 is available. The other 25 is reserve.
Okay.
And so what I tell guys to look at is that ratio between the two, and we want a 1-to-2 ratio. Like I said, 25 P1, 50 P2, or 30 P1, 60 P2. Mm-hmm. Some soils, some high pH soils, very high clay content soils can have a ratio that is as much as 1-to-10, maybe 1-to-20 even. So I will see P1s that are in the range of, let's say, 6 to 10 parts per million, and a P2 over 100 parts per million. So what that's telling me is that there's plenty of phosphorus in the soil. The problem is it's tied up and not available to the plant. And so you typically see that on a very high pH soil, specifically over 7.5. And I see a lot of pHs that are 8 to even 8.5. So there aren't a lot we could do to correct those types of pHs, but things we can do when you see that wide ratio between P1 and P2 is use things like starters, and instead of broadcasting, we want a knife. Mm-hmm. We want, strip till, for instance, would be a way to get around that. Another thing you can use is sulfur. Sulfur is a great product in high pH soils like I've described here, with when you have a wide ratio between P1 and P2. Mm-hmm. Sulfur is very acidic, and you're not going to lower that pH, but what you can do temporarily is free some of that phosphorus up, mm-hmm. and because of the acidic nature of sulfur. And
Jim, can I butt in on you? We're going to have to cut out again.
Absolutely.
We usually end on the third, but Bradley's got a couple more questions he wants to ask you. So could you hang around for just a little bit for our next segment? So what we're going to do is come back, and we're going to talk. Brad's got a couple more questions for Jim. Mm-hmm. We're going to expose our focus on the farmer this week. So we will be right back with more Bull Sessions on 680 KFEQ.